This is chapter 9 for floral design, which is foliage selection. All right, so your learning targets and objectives for today are to identify the application for the foliage in an arrangement, explain how the color and texture of foliage could be used to enhance a floral design, and choose foliage according to its form to achieve its intended purpose in a design. And describe how foliage can be used to create rhythm in a floral design. Identify types of foliage that are commonly used in floral design and match the cost of foliage material to its intended use in a floral design. So foliage selection, there are some places that, will choose foliage based on the price. What we need to look at first is the composition of it. So if you look at the leaves on the screen, you have some different options that kind of give a different texture and a different feel. To me, it's kind of like a jungle vibe when you look at these plants. That's kind of what you're looking for. The greens are used to establish form, amplify the style, hide mechanics. So you're going to hide your foam, hide your wire, tape, all of that stuff with some of the greens. And they're also an element to the design. So the criteria for it, the application is going to be important. So like this one, they have some greens actually wrapped in the bottom of the vase. And they used ones that have some really cool coloring to it that also are complemented. They basically complement the arrangement itself. So your mechanical needs, do I need to hide something? Am I going to green up that foam so that I'm hiding that foam? That's part of the mechanical needs. How will the foliage be used in your design? Will it use behind mechanics? Does it need to be wired? The W principle applies here again. Who, what, where, what is it for? So like this person, this looks like a bridal bouquet. They probably really like the color green. They said, hey, give me as much greens as you can. And they threw it together with a couple orchids in this arrangement. Some other applications, you need to consider the foliage that's available. Once again, if it's available versus out of season, the cost is going to be affected. The mechanical designs, like this one, they have a lot of greens hanging out of this bridal bouquet. You have to make that so it's done, so it's fresh. Or is these, that's Berengi fern, that's what it looks like. It falls apart pretty quickly as it dries out. Water source, customer's preference, and the longevity. So that all ties together from using your greens. All right, so some applications here. This one you can see there's a lot of greens. They have petals, or not petals, but leaves tucked into this bouquet. This arrangement has a whole bunch of greens throughout, and you have some that even hang down. And there's a bunch of greens here. This looks like what they would use for a pew arrangement in a wedding. Some things to look at, they have compatibility with the flowers selected. You kind of want to give it the same texture and feel. It might look kind of funky if you put a rose with this type of leaf. You also want to kind of look at the container you selected. If you have really long leaves, maybe a short little container is not going to work for you. And you need to think about the design style. Sometimes you can use those leaves or the foliage to help you achieve a shape. Those are all things that you need to consider. So you can see here like these long leaves are giving a lot of height to make that a linear arrangement. So you need to look at the purpose, help it establish size. You can use it to design lines like they did here with these leaves, and it also gives it some form. Color and texture, you can add so much color and texture with these different foliage options. They're not only green. This is actually a Dusty Miller plant that they have in the middle here. You can see there's lots of different colors available. There's an ivy over here. Lots of shades and variations you can use through the foliage to help bring in different colors. So it says examine foliage for shape and configuration. You could look at shiny versus dull leaves, dotted versus striped, sleek versus ruffled, large versus small, venation or no venation. Venation's not that complicated. There's little lines in the leaves. They call them veins. If you think of like a corn leaf that has a lot of venation, you can see the stripes in it basically. You have broadleaf versus needle-like leaves. So basically, is the leaf going to be wide or skinny? Lots of things to think about as you're selecting foliage. There's some really cool stuff you can do. If you notice, like these are all braided options. It's almost, well, this one's more of a weaving, but kind of cool effects you can create through the foliage. Rhythm. Vines create dynamic lines It can add rhythm. Basically rhythm, you're trying to get things to flow together in almost like a repeating sense. You can see here they're different greens, but they have greens hanging down, and it's almost symmetrical if you look at it, if you were to split it right here. But they tried to make sure they alternated to create rhythm within the arrangement. Some other options for rhythm, they have pattern created with overlapping leaves, and use natural pattern to your advantage. So if a plant were to grow in this shape, use that to your advantage to create rhythm in your arrangement. Use it for a backdrop, something to help draw your eye in. Maybe you put a big flower here, and all of these lines above are going to help draw your eye to that focal point. Some combinations, there's some that have dominant lines, some that are a mass shape, so it's a bigger leaf, and distinctive forms. You can see this leaf has a very distinct shape. Foliage combinations should use some thoughtful placement. It's going to help with the texture. Adding these greens all around here kind of gives it a natural design. You don't even really see the container, not that you need to hide it, but it kind of makes it look more natural. You can use different forms for textural effect. Multiple similar materials make for messy arrangements. So if you put a big wad of one type of plant in there, it's going to look kind of messy. And this one, to be honest, could be cleaned up a little bit too. They have a big chunk of this right here. I would have thinned it out just a little bit. Harvesting wild foliage, you do have to be careful. Like it says in the bottom bullet, you got to recognize those poisonous plants. If you haven't heard the leaves of 3, leave them be. That's always a good motto. It helps you identify poison ivy. But do make sure, actually one of the things too I found out one of my first years of teaching is that you cannot actually harvest cattails without a permit. So there's different things like that that will come up. Kind of interesting if you think about it. So this is showing you how they cut. This is actually what they do if you go to church Palm Sunday. They'll actually trim the edge of the leaves, not necessarily to this extent, but basically take any of the gross looking edges off. You can take scissors and just trim it up. So they're showing you that through the images here. Cost of foliage, it is less expensive. And that's why they use it to cover mechanics. You can see there's a lot of leather leaf underneath all of these flowers. This isn't my favorite arrangement, to be honest. This is the type of container you guys have in your floral design kits. They'll do the greening first and then add the flowers after, but to me it looks like there's a couple holes in this arrangement. It can be more expensive depending on the type of design. So this one, it's going to cost more for the fact they took leaves, folded them up, pinned them together, and made them look really cool, but just be aware of that. So that is Chapter 9, Foliage Selection.